Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 967 for August 28th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
We really believe that, if we produce, a really good quality spirit and just pay attention to that we will gain a fantastic following and people really will appreciate our spirit and, what we're doing to make an amazing spirit.
Ireland's Clonakilty Distillery marked the third birthday for its own single pot still whiskey this May, but they're holding off on releasing it for another couple of years. In the meantime, they're bottling their sourced whiskeys. We'll meet Sean Scully, whose parents founded the distillery on their family farm, and head distiller Oisin Mulcahy on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, and on Behind the Label.
I sourced out that cask again and basically just said, Bill, come on, let's see what it tastes like.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Gabriel Cardarella here with Dewar's Whiskey, inviting you to enjoy this episode of WhiskyCast with a glass of Dewar's, the most awarded blended Scotch whisky in history.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Hiya, Mark. How's my favourite Redbreast fan doing? Look, I'm going to address the elephant in the room right away. We both know your podcast is dying for a co-host, and I know just the lad who can be the Robin to your Batman. How's that for dropping a hint?
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. The Kentucky Bourbon Benefit Auction to raise money for flood relief raised $1.4 million, with the high bids coming for a pair of Four Roses private barrel selections. The high bid was $157,000, and Four Roses offered up a second selection for the runner-up bidder to match that high bid. Just a reminder that the Four Roses Special Flood Relief Edition goes on sale Monday only at the distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. All proceeds from the $200 bottles will go to help flood victims in eastern Kentucky. Meanwhile, Buffalo Trace's flood relief auction had just 6 lots, but raised more than $64,000. The high bid was $20,800 for a complete set of the Van Winkle whiskeys. Scotch whisky prices could be on the rise. A new survey from the Scotch Whisky Association found that more than half of its members have seen their costs double over the past year because of inflation. The survey also found that energy and shipping costs are the biggest factors, with nearly 6 out of 10 distillers surveyed projecting a 50% increase in energy costs over the next year, and 3 out of 4 projecting a similar increase in shipping costs. That's critical because Scotch whisky is the UK's #1 food and drink export, and increases in shipping costs will likely be passed on down the line to consumers. The association is asking the UK's next Prime Minister to hold the line on whisky excise duties in the autumn budget. That budget will be released after the Conservative Party settles on either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss as the next Prime Minister. Louisville building officials have ordered the demolition of a historic bourbon rickhouse in the city's Irish Hill neighborhood over safety concerns. The old Nelson Distillery warehouse dates back to the 1890s. The Louisville Courier-Journal reports historic preservation activists are upset about plans to tear down the building as part of the Distillery Commons redevelopment. Code enforcement officials say the building's walls are failing and the majority of the roof has already caved in. An attorney for the developers says Friday's order validates their attempt to get the building demolished so that the development can move forward. A city spokeswoman says there is no timetable for the demolition. The building is one of the last remaining pieces of the historic Anderson-Nelson Distilling Company, which was at one time Kentucky's largest distiller. In other news, Four Roses has revealed its annual limited edition small batch bourbon. This year's release is a blend of 4 of the distillery's 10 different recipes, 14-year-old OESF and OESV whiskeys, along with a 15-year-old OESK and a 20-year-old OBSV. The E's stand for the distillery's low rye mash bill, the B for the high rye, while the last letter indicates the yeast strains. Those are where the flavors come from, as Master Distiller Brent Elliott explained on a Zoom call with whiskey writers.
It's all about balance. Everything we try to do here, you want a little bit of spice, you want a little bit of sweetness, you want a little bit of oak. And it's all about maintaining that balance while creating something that's unique and interesting.
The limited edition will go on sale at the distillery starting on September 19th. That's the day after the Kentucky Bourbon Festival ends. Glenmorangie is out with the latest release in its Bond House No. 1 series of limited edition single malts. The Grand Vintage 1998 comes from the same year that Dr. Bill Lumsden was promoted from distillery manager to director of whiskey creations. It was one of his first experiments, as Glenmorangie's David Blackmore explains.
I was a little curious. I like my Glenmorangies personally. I like a lot of wine finishes, and this was not that. So I was a little reticent, and I shouldn't have been. I should have trusted Dr. Bill here. So there's a couple of interesting combinations here in terms of cask types. There's a large proportion of virgin new charred oak in this Grand Vintage, and this is a relatively aged Glenmorangie, 23, 24 years old. And you would expect maybe that new char oak component to be overly spicy and to dominate the whiskey. And there is some spice there, but what really brings it all back together is the second component, which I guess takes a bit of a leaf out of the way that we make Glenmorangie 18. And it is aged for about 20 years in American white oak ex-bourbon barrels, and then receives a finish in Oloroso sherry casks, a 3-4 year finish. And I think it's that component that acts as almost a polish to the virgin new charred oak casks, and brings it sort of subtles it all up. That's not a word, you know what I mean? It brings everything back to a place of balance, which is so crucial with a light, elegant spirit like Glenmorangie.
It'll carry a recommended retail price of $900 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Construction is underway now on the Ardgowan Distillery on the Ardgowan Estate west of Glasgow, and there's a new blended malt from whiskey maker Max McFarlane to mark the occasion. Clyde-built Sailmaker is a blend of 6 whiskies from Highland, Lowland, and Speyside distilleries, matured in first-fill Oloroso sherry casks. It celebrates the heritage of Scottish shipbuilding on the River Clyde. The whiskey carries a recommended retail price of £52.50 and is available through the distillery's website and at whiskey specialist shops in Scotland. We've seen whiskeys inspired by movies, music, and all sorts of things over the years, but now Chivas Brothers has turned to the video game world for inspiration. Moth and Wolf is a new blended scotch inspired by the PlayStation video game The Last of Us Part 2, as part of the company's Digital Spirits project to collaborate with artists across all forms of media. Like most video games, pre-order details will be announced soon through the Digital Spirits website. Of course, sports has influenced whiskey for a long time, and with Wales making it to this year's World Cup for the first time since 1958, Penderyn is releasing a commemorative whiskey to mark the occasion in partnership with the Welsh football program. Emma Hohid gets its name from the Welsh side's anthem and translates to "We Are Still Here," and I'm sure I have butchered that name. The World Cup is still 3 months away, but the whiskey is now available at retailers and online. There's no word on pricing. Barrel Craft Spirits is out with its latest release. Vantage is a blend of whiskeys finished in 3 different types of virgin oak casks: Japanese Mizunara oak, French oak, and toasted American oak casks. It carries a recommended retail price of $79.99 a bottle. And Michter's will be releasing its second-ever batch of US1 Toasted Barrel Sour Mash whiskey. It's the standard US1 Sour Mash, finished in toasted American oak casks. The whiskey was first released back in 2019. The new edition will be available starting in September, with a recommended retail price of $100 a bottle. Finally, there's been a shake-up at Whiskey Magazine. Editor Christopher Coates is moving up to a new role, leading Paragraph Publishing's Partnered Content Division. Bethany Weimark takes over the editor's role at Whiskey Magazine. She's been editing the Drinks Report and Gin Magazine for Paragraph. Congratulations to both Christopher and Bethany. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Things are starting to get busy now. This weekend brings the Spirit of Speyside Distilled Food and Drink Festival in Elgin, Scotland, along with Whisky Live in Adelaide, Australia, and the Black Bourbon Society's Bourbon Bowl in Louisville, Kentucky. The Sydney Whisky Fair is September 9th and 10th, and the National Whisky Festival is on the 10th in Aberdeen, Scotland. A few tickets are still available for the Kentucky Bourbon Festival in Bardstown, September 16th through the 18th, along with Whisky Live Toronto on the 17th and 18th, and the Wisconsin Whiskey Fest in Milwaukee on the 17th. We do have one cancellation to report. COVID restrictions are still in place in Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong Whiskey Festival, set for September 17th and 18th, has now been postponed until next April. If you're organizing a whiskey event, please let us know about it. We'll be glad to add it to the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. The calendar is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. 2 homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Family-owned farm distilleries are nothing new. They've been around since the beginning of whiskey making centuries ago. But Ireland's Clonakilty Distillery is a bit different. The Scully family came to distilling only recently, compared to their history in farming, 9 generations spanning 350 years on the same farm outside of the town of Clonakilty in County Cork. They're bottling sourced whiskey while their own single pot still continues to mature on the farm. I talked this week with Sean Scully and head distiller Oisin Mulcahy, and Sean says his parents came up with the idea to open the distillery in the first place.
The idea initially came about to start the distillery probably in 2013 or 2014. So the goal was to start a new local business to provide jobs for the area of Clonakilty, and just to kind of cut down a bit of travel also for my parents. So we have our own family farm down in County Cork, and we really wanted to show what we can do with that land. So currently it's like a dairy farm for the most part. But we've started growing our own grains for our own whiskey since we opened the distillery. So we knew we had the expertise to grow our own grains on the farm, and we obviously wanted to showcase our cows and the milk, the dairy aspect that we produce. So coupled with that, we decided to grow our own grains for the whiskey. We've grown up in Clonakilty. We've owned the farm that we currently farm for 350 years, 9 generations. So it's something we're very proud of. So we really wanted to tie that story back into the distillery and our new business. So we knew we had a very wide expertise of farming, and we could grow our own grain for our whiskey. And we also, really wanted to showcase the dairy aspect of our farm. So we decided to grow our own grains for the whiskey, and also to make our gin and our vodka from our whey-based spirits produced from our own cows on that farm.
So you're making your own Irish cream liqueurs then too, right?
No, we don't make any Irish cream liqueurs, just vodka and gin from that whey-based spirit. So
Okay.
as opposed to being made from a grain, it's all made from whey-based spirit, traceable back to our farm, our surrounding farms. So that was the the original premise of what we really wanted to do that was our main goal of starting the distillery, was to showcase the land and what we have at our disposal. So ultimately, we saw the Irish whiskey renaissance happening, and we thought it was a brilliant opportunity to get into the Irish whiskey scene. So we spent a couple of years developing the brand, and then in about 2017, a wonderful building in the town of Clonakilty became available for sale, which is the Waterfront building. That's the building now that we're currently located in. It was originally built to be a bank in 2008, but that actually never materialized due to the financial crash. It became a Gael school, an Irish-speaking primary school, for a couple of years. And when it became available again, we thought it was the perfect building to put our distillery into. So that houses all the production, obviously, and the visitor centre. There's a restaurant on the side, gift shop, all that stuff in the town of Clonakilty. And then when we bring our new make spirit back out to the family farm on the coast, where we have our Atlantic Ocean maturation warehouse. So that's where we mature our whiskey.
Oisin, tell me about your background in distilling. How did you wind up with Clonakilty?
Fairly long story, I think. Even though I suppose I started my kind of career back in Dingle, where I'm from, which is not too far from Clonakilty, about 2 hours west. And many people who are familiar with Irish whiskey would know that Dingle Distillery is probably one of the first of the new breed of distilleries to open. First in 100 years, I believe. So it kind of purpose-built to open in 100 years. And because it was on my doorstep, I suppose, I was lucky enough to get a job. I kind of walked in the door first day, just kind of looking for an excuse, just any old job, really. My background is, I was an archaeologist before this, so there wasn't that many jobs available in archaeology at the time. So I was home from Canada. I spent 2 years in Canada. And when I came back to Dingle, I suppose I was just looking for a stopgap until I figured out what next step to take. And as soon as I walked in the door, I kind of fell in love with the whole process. And thankfully, I was lucky enough to move on to the production side of things pretty quickly. A few years later, we got some very valuable experience in a number of different Irish distilleries. And when the job came up, my first head distiller job, Clonakilty was a dream job in many ways. It's the perfect size distillery for what I kind of want, which is kind of a lot of hands-on input. Like, I'm the head distiller, but I'm also the blender, so it's an ideal scenario for me, because it means I can take control and learn the kind of get the production in order, and also have a direct impact on the liquid that we're putting out as well.
What makes Clonakilty different from other Irish distilleries?
I think the family-run kind of aspect of it is kind of an important thing. You really do feel that everyone on the team, it's not this big, enterprise that's trying to pass itself off as kind of something different. It's very authentic. You can feel like most of the people that are here have been here since the very beginning. I actually live on the family farm, Sean's family farm, just in a kind of a temporary accommodation, which means I'm 2 minutes from work, essentially, which is very nice. And it just has that feeling of totally unique in this industry. Not to mention the product that we're releasing, the way we make them. There's no rush. There's no panic to make as much money as possible, or kind of finish or release a product that isn't, just the perfect way we want it. For instance, everything from the way we dilute the spirit, slowly over time. We're not in a rush to do that. We believe strongly that adds significant quality to our finished product. Also, the way we kind of we're in no rush to release our own liquid, even though it is mature as of this year. But we feel it's not quite there yet. So I think having that kind of creative control and knowing that that the quality of the product is ultimately the thing that's driving everything is definitely what makes Clonakilty kind of unique.
I'm nosing the single pot still spirit that's about 3 years old right now, and that you've just said is not going to be ready for another couple of years.
Yeah.
Tell me about this spirit.
Well, like anyone who's familiar with like single pot still, now this particular one that you're sampling there just turned 3 years old in the middle of May this year, so it's just gone 3 years old. And it's a 50-50 mash bill essentially, so 50% unmalted barley and 50% malted barley. We've experimented with those ratios since then, but that one is 50-50. And anyone who's familiar with Irish pot still will know the kind of the well-known characteristic, the spicy and kind of grainy element. But they also understand that like it's generally understood that pot still whiskey takes a little longer to round off. It can be quite forceful if you're not used to kind of that cereal kind of note and that spice. I think personally, actually, this one is quite mellow, because our processes, like I said, are actually quite unique as well. So our fermentation time is 100 hours, whereas most distilleries would ferment in 72 minimum and kind of distill straight away. That longer fermentation time gives us more ester production, a softer spirit, distillation is slower. I feel like that has had an effect on the drinkability of even a 3-year-old pot. So it feels older than it is, and I think I'm really excited for the next 2 years because I think it'll be very special.
It tastes older than it is. I love the spices on the finish. Those pot still spices just sort of have a delayed onset, and then they come on towards the finish.
Yeah,
it has a nice touch to it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And our new make anyway from filling the cask every day has an amazing like forest fruit sort of character to it. It's very kind of blackberry jam sort of thing. So I really find that comes across quite strong as well, and a very fruity kind of bouquet to our pasta and our new make in general, actually.
Sean, Oisin mentioned the collaborations that you've done with other distillers in terms of getting your source whiskey for the time being until your whiskey becomes mature. But you guys have also been doing a lot of other collaborations as well, with brewers and distillers in the U.S. especially. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, of course. So with every state we enter into the U.S., we try to pair up with a local brewery that has a lot of similarities to ourselves. Ideally, they'll have a similar brand story. For instance, I'm living in Portland, Oregon right now. We're paired up with Pelican Brewing, who are a maritime brewery. We're obviously a maritime distillery. We also have a lot of similarities in terms of our sustainability efforts. So, ideally, an independent brewery is what we try and pair up with, and who have a similar story to ourselves. So that being said, we've paired up with probably about 7 or 8 breweries stateside to date, and we also have a collaboration with Catoctin Creek Distillery in Virginia. So I'm pretty sure you have a sample of that collaboration, Mark, don't you?
I do have a sample of that. I'll be tasting it for our tasting notes segment after this interview runs. But explain that collaboration, because I know you used their rye whiskey barrels, right?
Yeah, exactly. So traditionally, like, we'll use beer barrels, obviously, with the breweries. So it'll be stouts, IPAs, barley wines, red ales, you name it. But yeah, with Catoctin Creek, we've used their rye casks and their porter casks. Most of our collaborations are bottled at cask strength. Normally, somewhere in 50 to 59% ABV. But this Catoctin Creek collaboration comes in at a whopping 62% ABV. So it's really up there, but it doesn't drink like it at all. It's approachable. You get that rice spice. But honestly, that kind of, that rice spice somehow like kind of tones down that high ABV. And it's a very drinkable, approachable whiskey all around.
Are these collections available in other states outside of, for instance, Virginia, where Catoctin Creek is? Would you find this in other states?
Traditionally not. We are expanding our online shop in the next couple of weeks. And we plan to have some of the collaborations offered online there. And moving forward, I think the general plan is to, not only just release, our Pelican Brewing collaboration in Oregon, for instance, but have it available on our online shop for people throughout America to purchase. And in general, if you're visiting our distillery in Ireland, we tend to have some bottles of these collaborations available at our distillery shop.
You mentioned the sustainability aspects. Tell me about what you've done to make this distillery sustainable, besides recycling the old bank building.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, where to start? First and foremost, I suppose, is, the main thing, well, not the main thing, but, the core part of our business is the fact that we grow our own grain. And, the single pot still that you're tasting right now, that unmalted barley aspect of it, will be a portion of that will be our own grain, which is grown on the edge of the ocean in Clonakilty. So there's that. We contribute to whale and dolphin conservation. We're very proud of that. We contribute to smaller local, like maritime groups like the Inchydoney Inshore Lifeboat Group. We're all about kind of trying to increase the biodiversity of the wildlife in Clonakilty. So we're building a new warehouse currently, and we're also going to be putting in a permanent wildflower meadow there and a bee bank. Possibly even maybe cultivating a yeast derived from maybe some bees. Of course, you have the distillery aspect of things, where we send our spent grains, pot ale, and spent lees to be used as fertilizer, animal feed, and we use our own water from our own family farm to cut down our whiskey. And that's only the start of it. I could go on for ages. This is, all our packaging it's 98% reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And that's the aim, is to have that 100% pretty soon. And we're trying to reduce our glass weight, all these kind of things. So we're very conscious of being sustainable. We're proud members of the Origin Green, group, operated by Borbia. So it's something we really, really focus on.
Give me a sense of what the future holds for you guys. Where do you hope to be, say, 5 to 10 years from now?
We're very ambitious. We're a young distillery. Only opened our doors 3 years ago. Started laying down our first spirit 3 years ago. So, our single pot still just came of age, a couple months ago. And I think we've probably expanded faster than we probably would have anticipated. We're in, 14 or 15 states right now. We're in Japan, South Africa, all throughout Europe. So, I mean, we're just going to concentrate on what we're doing. We really believe that, if we produce, a really good quality spirit and just pay attention to that we will gain a fantastic following, and people really will appreciate our spirit and, what we're doing to make it amazing spirit. So we're just kind of sticking to our guns in that sense right now. And, obviously hoping to continue to grow and hopefully be in all 50 states in America soon and more countries throughout the world.
Oisin, you said you grew up in Dingle, and I'm curious to get your take on what it means to have a distillery like this in a small town, because Dingle Distillery helped put that town even more on the map than it already was, and Clonakilty Distillery is doing the same. What does it mean to a small town to have a distillery like this with an international profile?
I think it's vital. I think for our industry, and I suppose it's a very small industry at the moment. Outside of the big boys, the Middletons and the Bushells and stuff, we're all quite a small kind of. There's only a handful of distilleries really that are kind of springing up now. And I think that means that we have so much to kind of share with each other as far as knowledge. People are kind of developing our own style all the time, trying to build the Irish whiskey brand again. And I think it's kind of a lot about educating Irish people again as well. I think a lot of the time, the US and Canada and Japan and all the other countries are quite familiar with Irish whiskey. And a lot of the times, I think it's the local community, and I think it's vital to be able to build our industry again in Ireland, not just for the sake of the brand, but also for the sake of, as a distiller, from a distiller's perspective, building the expertise needed to run a distillery, and the future of kind of these distilleries is vital, because I know, like, it really is, like, there's so many distilleries in the country now that are opening up, and their demand for trained, experienced distillers is exploding. And it's really an industry that, like, we need that local, homegrown kind of talent to come through. And I think it's very important in a small town like Clonakilty that comes. Like, we were lucky in Dingle in that, 90% of the people who work there were from the area. They could have easily kind of got people in from outside who had better experience or whatever, but it means something to build it from the bottom. And I think it's the same here as well. I think you need to, I think in the future when Clonakilty is looked at, there won't be a person in the town who hasn't some connection to the distillery in the future as being a major employer and a major source of revenue for the area. So I think it's very important that you have a good connection, a good relationship with the local area.
Sean, what's the next release that we can expect to see?
I mean, we're always coming out with different releases. I think we have that reputation of, being one of the main distilleries that focuses on collaborations. So you'll see those all the time. I don't have any name to necessarily give you for that, but I mean, the big one to look out for will be the single pots though. Things are progressing, a lot faster with that, in terms of the quality of that spirit than we expected. It's 3 years old right now, like we said, and our original plan was to wait till it was about, 6 or 7 years old to release it. But things are, we're really, really happy with how it tastes so far. So we're looking like at a 2024 release for that spirit. And that'll be a game-changing release for us, our own juice on the market with a fabulous story behind it, with regards to, growing our own grains for it and all that, using our own water source. So we're really, really excited to have that released in 2024.
Thanks to Sean Scully and Oisin Mulcahy for joining us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with that collaboration between Clonakilty and our friends at Catoctin Creek. It's bottled at a whopping 62% ABV, and the nose has rye-forward baking spices, along with touches of dried grass clippings, honey, vanilla, and a hint of citrus. The taste is thick and creamy with a good buildup of clove, cinnamon, and white pepper spices, along with honey and citrus fruits in the background. The finish is nice and long with lingering spices and a hint of citrusy tartness. I'm scoring the Clonakilty Catoctin Creek finish a 92. Next up, let's look at this year's Four Roses limited edition small batch bourbon. It comes from 4 different recipes matured for between 14 and 20 years, and it's bottled at 54.5% ABV. The nose is complex with a nice balance of oak, spices, and sweetness. There's a touch of chocolate, along with cherries, apricots, brown sugar, and a hint of nuttiness. The taste is syrupy thick with notes of caramel apples, apricots, black cherries, hints of clove and cinnamon, honey, vanilla, and chocolate. The finish is long and complex with just a hint of oak. I'm scoring the 2022 Four Roses Limited Edition Small Batch a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 100-time award-winning Maryland-style rye. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, double oak, cask strength, or reserve series of ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails at a retailer near you. Just visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. We heard about the new Glenmorangie Grand Vintage 1998 during the news. This one is bottled at 43% ABV. The nose has touches of orange peel, figs, dates, brown sugar, honeycomb, mango, papaya, and tropical flowers. The taste is thick, luscious, and vibrant with tropical notes of mango and papaya, along with dried flowers, subtle spices, honeycomb, and a subtle sherry influence with figs and dates. The finish is long with tropical fruits and flowers. I'm scoring the Glenmorangie Grand Vintage 1998 a 95. Finally, I mentioned Ardbegg's 4th edition of its 19-year-old Trayvon last week during the news. I got a chance to taste it this week in New York City with David Blackmore. It's bottled at 46.2% ABV. The nose has touches of grilled pineapple, a soft smokiness, coffee creamer, and a hint of heather. The taste is fruity and tart with a hint of nuttiness, a gentle touch of smoke to remind you that it is still an Ardbeg, grilled pineapple, bitter lemon, dried fruits, vanilla beans, and just a hint of honeysuckle. The finish is long and tart with lingering touches of spice and smoke, and I'm scoring the 4th edition of Ardbegg's Trayvon a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,400 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
Dewar's master blender Stephanie McLeod's innate curiosity, combined with her passion for whiskey maturation, cask finishing, and blending, has created some truly incredible expressions for Dewar's Scotch whisky. It's also earned her 4 consecutive Master Blender of the Year titles at the International Whiskey Competition, making her the first person to achieve such an accolade. Her innovative spirit is the inspiration behind the ultra-premium Dewar's Double 32 Year, the highest-rated blended Scotch whiskey in the world with a score of 94.4. So whether you consider yourself a whiskey connoisseur or just want to find an exciting new whiskey experience, consider one of Stephanie's other masterful expressions, including Dewar's 15-year, Double 21-year, or Dewar's 8-year Mizunara cask finish, and discover just how rewarding curiosity can be. Enjoy responsibly.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Isla Single Malt Scotch Whisky. Got this tweet from Dave Kuhn the other day. Do you think the UK ban on peat used for gardening will have any carryover effect, leading to some movement that could endanger our precious phenol levels? Well, keep in mind that the amount of peat used for malting barley is minuscule compared to the amount of peat harvested for gardening use, and that there have been no moves yet to ban the burning of peat, which is, for all intents and purposes, a fossil fuel. Peat bogs make great carbon sinks, but there are still a lot of people in rural Scotland and the islands who depend on peat to heat their homes. Because of that, a ban on burning peat as fuel is not likely anytime soon. However, there is one other environmental issue to keep an eye on. The Scottish Government has commissioned a study to look at the environmental impacts of the Angel's Share, that amount of whiskey that evaporates from each cask over time. The study is not going to look at the whiskey fungus that feeds on the evaporated alcohol, but the alcohol itself, since it contains so-called volatile organic compounds that could theoretically have an impact on public health and the environment. The researchers have been asked to look at ways of mitigating the Angel's Share, and as you might expect, that has the whiskey industry reacting with a bit of alarm. We'll keep you posted. And Dave, thank you for the question. I also wanted to give a shout-out to Ranger Rick on Twitter. He went shopping during the Kentucky Bourbon Benefit Auction and shared a photo of the bottles he bought in the auction with us on Twitter. Well done, my friend. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, just look for me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can just email me. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Islay's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. There's a question that has had whiskey lovers debating for years. What would happen if you took a barrel of bourbon to Scotland for aging and a barrel of Scotch whisky to Kentucky? Well, we now know at least part of the answer. Turns out a cask swap just like that happened once. Glenmorangie's David Blackmore tells the story behind the swap.
Well, back way before my time at the Glenmorangie Company, my predecessors did a little barrel swap. And we're talking like must have been like 27, 28 years ago at least. They did a little barrel swap, and a cask of American whiskey, we're not certain exactly where it was distilled, to be honest, Mark, was filled in Kentucky and then physically shipped to Scotland almost immediately. And it has spent its entire life maturing in Scotland. At the same time, we filled a barrel full of Glenmorangie New Spirits, and it went in the other direction. And I've always heard this story. Well, actually, truth be told, Mark, it was a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, that I discovered that our barrel existed, but I hadn't tasted it until earlier this year on a trip back, my first trip back after the pandemic. And I sourced out that cask again and basically just said, Bill, come on, let's see what it tastes like. And to my absolute delight, what you might have expected is absolutely the case. This low-slung, earthen-floored dunnage warehouse has done great things for a long, slow maturation. So there's real subtlety still in this really old, can you call it bourbon? Don't know. This really old American distillate that's been maturing in Glenmorangie's warehouse. It's a great example of how the climate and the type of warehouse makes such a difference, so important to the maturation.
And you never figured out what happened to the other cask?
No, absolutely no idea at all. So if anybody's out there that knows what might have happened to the cask of Glenmorangie that came stateside, I suspect at some point it's probably been consumed at someone's retirement party, would be my strong guess. But yeah, I'd love to see what happened to the Glenmorangie that's been sitting in a really warm, humid environment like Kentucky for all those years. It'd be really exciting to find out what happened to that.
It would taste like the proverbial oak sandwich that Bill likes to refer to.
Yes, it might taste like an oak sandwich, but you know what? Without tasting it, you don't know. Going back to things like Glenmorangie Atlanta, which, 19 and a half years in virgin American oak sitting in Glenmorangie, Bill was fully expecting that to taste like an oak sandwich, and it didn't. There was a surprise. There was a learning there. Again, who knows? That barrel of Glenmorangie that sat in Kentucky might be sublime. Who knows?
Here's hoping that barrel of Glenmorangie is still sitting in a rickhouse somewhere in Kentucky, or at least what's left of it after 3 decades or so in the heat. By the way, technically a swap like that would be illegal today. Under Scottish law, it's illegal to export single malt whiskey outside of Scotland unless it's been bottled there first. Blended barrels are okay, though. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the Whiskey Photo of the Week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Well, folks, we're nearing the end of another great episode of WhiskyCast, which means you're probably craving some whiskey. Head on over to Dewar's.com or your local retailer to discover what makes Dewar's the most awarded blended Scotch whiskey in the world.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.